What's going on, everybody? This is LB the Realist with Surrealistic Studios, Surreal News, where the real is surreal. So, check this out. I'm going to read this article from news.yahoo.com. Biden's Syria airstrikes may feel like Trump deja vu. Here's what's different. Okay, this is an article written by Sam Heller. I'm just going to read a little bit from this article. It's not super long, but I don't think I need to get into the weeds here. I'm just going to give you the general point or the general consensus of what I believe is being said here. American airstrikes on Iran-linked paramilitaries in Syria this week were a deterrent response to attacks on U.S. forces in neighboring Iraq. Yet they also seem to have been a conscious refutation by the Biden administration of the Trump administration's wild, dangerous approach to both Iraq and Iran. Trump's recklessness almost ignited a regional war. The Biden team's handling of Thursday's airstrikes looks very intentionally un-Trump. But Trump left Biden with a dangerous enough predicament in Iraq that even a more careful, deliberate approach might not be enough to fix it. On Thursday evening, U.S. aircraft bombed Iraqi paramilitary factions on the Syrian-Iraqi border, in what the Pentagon said was a deterrent response in an effort to preempt ongoing threats. An official in one Iraqi paramilitary group told Reuters that the U.S. airstrikes had killed one fighter and wounded 4. Biden-ordered airstrike in Syria leaves 22 people dead, says Monitor. The U.S. airstrikes followed a February 15th rocket attack on a base used by U.S. and partner forces in Erbil, the capital of Iraq's Kurdistan region, and which killed one civilian contractor and wounded others. A wounded Iraqi civilian died several days later. On February 22nd, 3 rockets targeted the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad but left only material damage. The Syrian government denounced the U.S. airstrike in the strongest terms. One of the Iraqi factions targeted Kataib Hezbollah, likewise condemned American criminality. U.S. forces are in Iraq as part of the U.S.-led international coalition against ISIS to support Iraqi efforts to combat the jihadist group. In recent years, however, violence with Iran-linked paramilitaries has risked overshadowing the counter-ISIS mission. Thursday's airstrikes seem almost like a replay of the U.S. airstrikes in December 2019. Then the Trump administration responded to a deadly rocket attack, bombing Kataib Hezbollah facilities on the Syrian-Iraqi border, killing 25 fighters and injuring more than 50. After angry protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy compound, Trump retaliated in a stunning 0-60 escalation by killing Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi paramilitary veteran and security official Jamal Jafar, better known by the nom du guerre Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, in a drone strike. For days, the Middle East seemed to be on the brink of a broader U.S.-Iran war. The tension only broke after Iranian missile strikes on Iraqi bases hosting U.S. forces injured but did not kill U.S. personnel, which perversely opened the way for de-escalation. The U.S. presence in Iraq has remained precarious ever since. Violence in Iraq has periodically surged. U.S.-led coalition forces have evacuated most of the Iraqi bases, and the Trump administration nearly shut off the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. Iraqi paramilitaries continues to maintain that coalition forces are a foreign occupation, which is true. You could be forgiven for a feeling of deja vu then at Thursday's airstrikes on some of the same Iraqi paramilitary factions hitting the same stretch of Iraqi-Syrian border and worrying about a repeat of the spiraling escalation that marked the start of 2020. Yet this latest action by the Biden administration also differs from Trump's December 2019 airstrikes in some important respects. First, the regional context is different. The backdrop for the December 2019 airstrikes was the Trump administration's campaign of maximum pressure on Iran, a strategy whose stated goals amounted effectively to regime change. The rocket fire on U.S. forces in Iraq that precipitated those 2019 airstrikes was seemingly part of an asymmetric response by Iran's regional partners to crushing U.S. economic sanctions on Iran. After all, Iran could hardly reciprocate usefully by levying its own sanctions on the U.S. The Biden administration, by contrast, has impressed its intention to return to the Iran nuclear deal that Trump left, which promises a relaxation of economic pressure on Iran. More generally, the Biden administration has seemed eager to reduce the temperature regionally. down from the constant atmosphere of near war stoked by the Trump administration. The Biden administration's messaging around Thursday's airstrikes reflected that change in the regional context. The Trump administration, in announcing its 2019 airstrikes, pointedly emphasized these Iraqi paramilitaries' links to Iran. The Pentagon statement closed with a deterring warning aimed mainly at Iran. Iran and their KH proxy forces must cease their attacks on U.S. and coalition forces and respect Iraq's sovereignty to prevent additional defensive actions by U.S. forces. Trump actually escalated his rhetoric further in the latter days of his presidency, threatening to retaliate directly against Iran for rocket fire in Iraq. Some friendly health advice to Iran: if one American is killed, I will hold Iran responsible. Think it over, he tweeted in December 2020. The Biden administration, on the other hand, called the Iraqi factions that bombed Iranian-backed militant groups, but mainly kept its focus narrowly on the two specific groups it alleged were responsible for recent rocket attacks. When Biden was asked by a reporter Friday what kind of message the strike sent to Iran, he said, "You can't act with impunity. Be careful." Yet officials have otherwise avoided turning the strikes into a Trump-style U.S.-Iran duel. The Biden team's rhetorical restraint may reflect their consciousness of how to manage a larger engagement with Iran that is delicate and encompasses a number of issues, of which restoring the Iran nuclear deal seems to be one of the overarching priority. They may also be more sensitive to the legality of military action and how confidently they can attribute responsibility for the Erbil rocket attack. Even if the Biden administration were inclined to blame Iran for the Erbil attack, the real extent of Iranian control over Iraq's armed forces factions is debated, particularly after the killing of Soleimani and Muhandis. Without them, these Iran-linked factions have reportedly become more fractious and inclined to unilateral action. Saudi's crown prince is a killer, so why is Biden just shrugging? In addition to his rhetoric, the Biden administration departed from Trump's approach in other key aspects. The reported toll of Thursday's U.S. airstrikes, one fighter, not dozens, was seemingly more proportionate to the Erbil rocket fire. The Biden administration said the bombing was conducted together with diplomatic measures, including consultation with coalition partners whose personnel risk retaliation alongside Americans in Iraq. Biden's administration officials emphasized that they hit these factions inside Syrian territory, is another seeming contrast with the Trump administration, which provoked condemnation from even Iraqi officials amicable to the U.S. last year when it unilaterally bombed paramilitaries in Iraq and killed uninvolved Iraqis. By striking instead in Syria, Biden might have mitigated concerns about violating Iraqi sovereignty and avoided political controversy that could imperil a friendly government in Baghdad. So instead of, sacrificing Iraq's sovereignty, we're going to go ahead and sacrifice Syria's sovereignty. These paramilitary factions are part of Iraq's official auxiliary popular mobilization forces. In Syria, though, they operate outside Iraqi state auspices as part of the Iran-led resistance axis. Still, these paramilitaries dispute U.S. officials' grasp of geography. In a statement mourning the fighter killed in Thursday's airstrikes, Kataib Hezbollah said he was killed in the Iraqi region of Al-Qaim specifically, implying he died on the Iraqi side of the border. Kataib Hezbollah described the man both as its martyr, but also a member of the Popular Mobilization's 46th Brigade, who was standing guard on the Iraqi-Syrian border, protecting Iraq's land and people from the criminal bands of ISIS, and joined the caravan of martyrs for the nation's sovereignty and dignity. Let's see here. You know what? We'll just go ahead and finish the whole article here. It's not that long. Wherever the U.S. bombed, moreover, the Iraqi government might still face political blowback. How much of the government of Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi knew in advance of Thursday's airstrikes is unclear. U.S. officials had previously said they were supporting Iraqi authorities' investigation into the rocket attacks, but would also act in coordination with Iraqi partners at the time and place of their choosing. Biden spoke by phone with Kadhimi on Tuesday. A White House readout said the two had agreed that those responsible for recent rocket attacks must be held fully to an account. Iraqi paramilitaries and their political allies have seized, in particular, on remarks by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. In the wake of the strikes, Austin said, "We allowed and encouraged the Iraqis to investigate and develop intelligence for us, and that was very helpful to us in refining the target." U.S. officials have since tried to walk that back and denied using Iraqi information in Thursday's airstrikes. But Austin's comments still might endanger Kademi. Iran-linked factions have previously alleged Kademi was complicit, in the killing of Soleimani and Muhandis in his former capacity as Iraqi intelligence chief. Even if this week's U.S. airstrikes did not spark a repeat of last year's escalation, they risk perpetuating a cycle of violence that raises questions about the continued value of the U.S. presence in Iraq. U.S. and coalition partners still play an important role enabling Iraqi forces to pursue ISIS militants who wage ongoing guerrilla warfare on Iraq's rural periphery. I think that's that word. Coalition forces are still in the country at the invitation of the Iraqi government. Without their technical contributions, the ISIS insurgency seems likely to become more dangerous. Yet if U.S. forces become more occupied on balance with defending themselves than with their counter-ISIS mission, then eventually they are a net negative for Iraqi security. With every new spasm of violence, Iraqi lives are put at risk. This is not a dilemma of the Biden administration's creation. It was the Trump's aggressive policy of maximum pressure that seemed to have started this cycle of violence. But now that the cycle is in motion, it is far from clear that even the most deliberate, finely tuned U.S. policy can usefully stop it. The Biden administration said it carried out Thursday's strikes in a deliberate manner that aims to de-escalate the overall situation in both eastern Syria and Iraq. But now that the U.S. has acted, the initiative belongs to Iraq's paramilitary factions. They are the ones who would choose when and how to respond, and whether the Biden administration's more collaborated approach actually does any good. Again, this was actually from news.yahoo.com, but they're getting their information, it looks like, from Daily Beast. So, what I'm getting is, see, Biden airstriked Syria just like Trump did. But, it's different, bro. It's totally different. It's totally different because Biden wants to de-escalate the situation in Syria. Biden wants Iran to join the Iran deal again. He wants to get back into the deal, bro. What's the problem, bro? See, Trump started this. It was Trump that amped everything up. It was Trump that started this. Again, we're going back to blaming Trump for everything. We're going back to blaming Trump. See, we didn't enter Syria during Trump's presidency, did we? We've been talking about this for a while now. This is an issue that we had before Trump, but yet they're just trying to make it seem as though Trump is the issue. And Biden only had to strike Syria because of Trump. And if it wasn't for Trump, Biden probably wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have needed to do it if it wasn't for Trump escalating the situation. See, Biden just wants to de-escalate. What's the best way to de-escalate in regards to, if I'm about to fight somebody, what is the best way to de-escalate that fight? By punching them in the face as hard as I can? Or by just walking away and ignoring them? Because that's what Biden just did. He punched Syria square in the nose and was like, "Bow, hey bro, I don't want to fight." You just punched Syria in the nose. You talking about you want to fight, you just punched him. Oh my goodness gracious. So we're going back to the basics here. Just everything is Trump's fault now. And if people decide to go back to sleep, if people decide to go back to sleep, we're going to just forget. Everybody's going to forget that we actually had issues and conflicts before Trump even got into office. So no, I don't agree that this is Trump's fault. Yeah, he escalated situations, but what do you call this? What do you call this? Because I sure see it as escalation. me your thoughts in the comment section below, folks. Am I wrong? Am I right? I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Like this video, share, and subscribe, folks. Love, peace, and light. And I mean that. Until next time, do something kind. And I'm out.